You've heard the headlines, the drama, the sensational stories. But the real truth, it's far more complicated and it's been kept in the shadows. What really happened behind closed doors in the royal family? This story isn't just about love or betrayal. It's about something much bigger, something that could change everything you thought you knew about the royals. Stick with me because the most shocking part of this entire story isn't what you think. The truth, the full truth, doesn't lie in one moment or one statement. It is embedded in a series of actions, decisions made over the years, in warnings that were ignored and boundaries that were crossed. The outcome was inevitable. Two brothers, once inseparable, now standing on opposite sides, unable to turn back. All of this, all the pain, the fractures, came from one woman. If you're here, hoping to uncover the truth about Meghan Markle, stay. Because the most shocking part of this story isn't what she did. It's how the entire family allowed everything to spiral into chaos and dysfunction. How we, who were supposed to stand united, became fractured beyond repair. I remember the first time it all started to crack. Harry was shouting at me, his face red with frustration, and I was shouting right back. It wasn't just an argument, it was a breakdown, a breaking point. And then just like that, he snapped. He pushed me to the ground. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about everything we had been through together as brothers. That moment, raw and violent, marked a shift that I couldn't ignore. Family, our family, overwhelms me at times. The pressure, the weight of expectation. It's more than just titles and duties. It's the invisible burden we carry every single day. In 1997, when our mother passed away, I was only 15. It wasn't just losing her that shook me. It was losing the sense of security, the foundation that had been everything for us. That loss, the grief, shaped us both in ways we couldn't even comprehend at the time. And it wasn't just a private loss, it was a public spectacle. The whole world watched as Harry and I walked behind her coffin, a moment that forever defined our lives, our roles, and our future. In the years that followed, we grew up in the same house, but we played very different roles. I was the heir, the one who would carry the weight of the crown. Every step I took was part of a carefully laid plan. I had to control my emotions, to suppress anything that might distract from the institution. Harry, on the other hand, was allowed to be freer, to exist in a way that I never could. His life was not defined by the same constraints. I had to be the one who held it all together for both of us. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, the press painted our relationship as unusually close for brothers in the royal family. Joint tour, charity events, military service, everything we did together seemed to reinforce the image of a united front. I thought that fragile balance would last forever, but in 2011, everything began to change. I got married. My responsibilities shifted, and my family's role in the world grew more complex. The balance, once fragile, was now more precarious than ever. But what mattered most was that we continued to maintain order. The royal family operated on a rhythm of ceremony, tradition, and above all, stability. From 2012 to 2015, Harry served in the military and took part in international missions. He returned with stories of a very different world, stories that were far harsher, more grounded, and filled with a level of impatience that I didn't recognize. I noticed it, but at the time, I thought it was just a normal reaction to what he had been through. But looking back, I see that it was the beginning of something much deeper, something more significant. Then in 2016, everything changed. In June, Britain voted to leave the European Union. The country was shaken, and in the middle of that upheaval, Harry introduced us to Meghan. Not a British woman, not someone who understood the complexities of our royal world, but someone who came from a completely different background. Someone who had written her own story, who understood the power of the media, and who wasn't afraid to use it. From the very first moment, I knew this wasn't just a romance. It was something far more strategic. There were no loud confrontations, no public disputes, but I could feel something shift beneath the surface. As someone who had lived and breathed the royal family for my entire life, I recognized the signs. Meghan wasn't here to fit in, she was here to change the narrative, to take control of the story. And that's when the questions started to bubble up in my mind, questions that no one dared to voice at the time. Why was everything moving so quickly? Why was the American press given access to Meghan before the British press? And most troubling of all, why was the narrative from the very beginning framed as one of victims and oppressors? It was. And long before the palace began issuing unusual statements, not to confirm anything, but to control the media fallout. This was a clear sign that what was once a personal matter was now becoming an institutional risk. I didn't oppose my brother's love for Meghan, but I began to ask questions that no one wanted to hear. What would the cost be if this wasn't contained? If this story wasn't controlled from the beginning, who would end up paying the price for it? Harry stopped listening. Every warning I gave was seen as control, every piece of advice dismissed as oppression. It was at that moment, when I saw my brother's growing detachment, that I realized something that sent a chill through me. Harry wasn't just in love. He had begun to see the royal family as the enemy. He began to believe that everything we had been, everything we had built, was standing in the way of his happiness, and that the family was the one to blame. But then, everything began to unravel in ways I hadn't anticipated. The balance that we once shared, the one that seemed so secure, started to shift imperceptibly at first, but then with increasing intensity. In 2011, I married. The responsibilities of the crown became more complex, and my role as a family member and heir became more defined. But despite the changes, I thought that our bond, our unity as brothers, would remain intact. We were a symbol, a powerful presence, two brothers, one future. Harry, however, was beginning to grow restless. The pressures of royal life had been weighing on him for years, and I could see the cracks starting to form. From 2012 to 2015, Harry served in the military, seeing firsthand the brutality of the world beyond our palace walls. His experiences, which were harsher than mine, seemed to shift something inside him. He came back changed, more grounded, and far less willing to follow the rigid, disciplined life that had always been expected of us. At the time, I assumed it was a normal adjustment. He had just come back from war, after all. But looking back, I see that it was something far deeper, something that signaled the beginning of a journey that would eventually pull us apart. Then in 2016, everything changed. The vote for Brexit shook the entire nation, and amidst that chaos, Harry introduced us to someone new. Not someone who was familiar with the royal protocols, not a British woman who understood the weight of our history, but a woman from a completely different world, Meghan Markle. She had built her own narrative, her own identity in Hollywood, and had learned how to manipulate her story in the media. The more I observed, the more I saw a woman with her own agenda, and I could sense a shift in the dynamic that none of us were prepared for. There were no immediate confrontations, no arguments in the open, but inside I could feel the tension growing. Meghan wasn't here to just adapt to the royal life. She came in with a strategy, one that was different from anything we had ever seen before. Her presence in the family was like a storm gathering on the horizon. There were early questions, two questions that no one dared to voice out loud. Why was everything happening so fast? Why was the American press given so much access, while the British press was left in the dark? Why was the story being framed as one of victims and oppressors from the very beginning? The palace began issuing statements, but they weren't meant to confirm anything. They were meant to limit the damage, to stem the tide of growing media frenzy. To those of us within the family, this was a clear sign. What had started as a personal relationship was now becoming a risk for the institution itself. And I began to ask questions that I knew no one wanted to answer. What happens when the personal begins to bleed into the institutional? What happens when the family becomes a pawn in a larger game? By the end of 2016, I was no longer just watching from the sidelines. I was involved. I had been giving advice, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions and decisions that were unfolding. But each word of caution I offered was met with resistance. Each attempt to guide Harry was seen as a threat. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. My brother wasn't just in love. He had started to see the family as the enemy. The truth is, I didn't oppose Harry's love for Meghan. I never did. But as the days turned into months and the events started to unfold, I realized that things were changing in ways we couldn't control. And when Harry stopped listening, when he began to reject every word of caution, I saw that we were no longer just brothers. We were two men standing on opposite sides of something much larger than ourselves. I could see that Meghan's story was being carefully crafted by a world that operated under different rules where every word spoken was strategically placed, every narrative carefully constructed. And when I looked at Harry, I saw someone who had fully embraced that new story, that new world. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about identity, about control, and about rewriting the rules of the royal family in a way that none of us had ever expected. As the months passed, the divide between Harry and me only deepened. There was no going back. Every attempt at reconciliation felt like a futile exercise. Conversations turned to arguments, and arguments turned to silence. In the space between us, I began to realize something else, that what had once been a brotherly bond, a connection built on shared experiences, had now become a distant memory. The past, with all its shared moments, began to feel like a different lifetime. In 2017, things started to accelerate. Harry and Meghan's relationship, which had been moving at an already fast pace, began to move even faster. It wasn't just a personal relationship anymore. It was something that had grown into a full-blown public spectacle. The royal family, once a symbol of unity and tradition, now found itself struggling to maintain its image in the face of a media onslaught that no one had anticipated. By the end of 2017, the cracks had turned into full-blown fissures. Harry and Meghan began to restructure their media and advisory teams, distancing themselves from the traditional royal system. The media hailed this as a step toward independence, but to those of us within the family, it felt like a step away from us, away from the very foundation of what it meant to be part of the royal family. The real turning point came after their wedding. The public saw a fairy tale, a beautiful ceremony, a moment that seemed to unite the world in celebration. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. Meghan reportedly declined several key royal customs, including working with royal advisors who had been by the family's side for decades. She questioned processes that had always been non-negotiable. For Harry, it was about protecting his wife, but for me, it signaled a lack of respect for a system that had stood for centuries. As the months turned into years, the divide grew. The requests for media control and security became more demanding, and when those requests weren't met, they began to make their frustrations public. And it was at this point, after everything had been laid bare, that I realized I could no longer stay silent. What was once a family matter had become a public spectacle, and the media was now controlling the narrative. It wasn't just about Meghan or Harry anymore. It was about how the world saw us. What was most painful, though, was the way Harry and Meghan's relationship with the royal family was framed by the media. In the US, they were portrayed as victims, fighting against a cold, outdated institution. In the UK, they were seen as rebels, breaking free from the constraints of tradition. And in all of this, the royal family, our family, was caught in the middle, with no voice, no way to defend itself. By 2019, everything had reached a boiling point. Harry and Meghan separated from the royal foundation, no longer working alongside my wife and me. It wasn't just a personal decision. It was a declaration that they were withdrawing from the very family that had once been everything to them. At that moment, I knew things could never be the same. We were no longer brothers in the way we once were. There were no more private conversations, no more heart-to-heart exchanges. We had become distant strangers, bound by blood but separated by something much larger than ourselves, something we could neither control nor undo. In 2011, I married, and with that, the responsibility of the royal family shifted into a new chapter. It wasn't just about personal milestones anymore. It was about carrying the weight of centuries of tradition and the expectation to uphold it. The royal family, for all its grandeur and ceremony, operated on a strict rhythm, one driven by tradition, discipline, and the unspoken rule that personal lives must serve the collective stability of the monarchy. Everything had to fall into place, like the gears of a well-oiled machine. From 2012 to 2015, Harry served in the military. He was thrust into international missions, where the world was harsh, unforgiving, and far removed from the insulated life we had lived. When he returned, he brought with him stories that were grounded in the gritty reality of military service, stories that were more direct, more raw, and far less patient with the constraints we had always lived by. I could see the changes in him, but at the time, I dismissed them as a normal part of reintegration after such a life-altering experience. After all, war changes a person, doesn't it? And Harry, though different, was still my brother. But then in 2016, everything shifted, and it happened so quickly that I barely had time to process it. In June of that year, Britain voted to leave the European Union. The country was thrown into chaos, the future uncertain, and the tension was palpable. Mid that turmoil, Harry introduced us to someone new, someone who wasn't from the royal world, Meghan Markle. She wasn't British, nor was she accustomed to the royal family's traditions. She wasn't molded by our world, but she came with her own story, her own ambitions, and a deep understanding of how to craft a narrative and share it with the world. I saw it immediately, and I couldn't help but feel the shift. There were no immediate confrontations, no shouting, no public disputes. Everything seemed calm on the surface. But with my years of experience inside this institution, I felt something unsettling beneath the quiet facade. Meghan didn't come into this family to simply fit in. She didn't come to adjust, to play by our rules. She came with a clear strategy, one that was unfamiliar to all of us, one that would, in the end, challenge everything we knew. And as I watched this unfold, questions began to rise in my mind, though none of us dared to voice them aloud. Why was everything moving at such an extraordinary pace? Why was the American press given access to Meghan and Harry before the British press? Why, from the very start, was their story framed in a way that divided the world into two sides, victims and oppressors? These weren't just idle musings. They were alarms going off in my mind, signaling that something was shifting, something I couldn't quite grasp but knew would have serious consequences. By the end of 2016, the palace began issuing unusual statements, not to confirm anything but to contain the damage. The statements were an attempt to manage the media fallout, but to those of us inside, it was clear. This wasn't just a personal relationship. This was becoming a risk, not just to the family, but to the entire institution. And I realized painfully that we were standing at the edge of a precipice. If this story wasn't controlled from the very beginning, if it wasn't kept within the boundaries of what the family could accept, who would ultimately pay the price? I didn't oppose Harry's love for Meghan. Love, after all, is personal. But what I couldn't ignore was how fast everything was moving, how quickly it had spiraled out of control. And when I started asking questions no one wanted to hear, Harry stopped listening. He began to see every piece of advice, every word of caution as an attempt to control him. Every warning was seen as an effort to suppress him, to limit his freedom. And every caution was dismissed as oppression. It was then that I had a realization, a cold, unsettling realization that sent a shiver through me. Harry wasn't just in love. It wasn't just about a relationship or a commitment. He had come to believe, truly believe, that this entire family was his enemy. He had accepted the narrative that we, his own family, were the ones standing in the way of his happiness. And in doing so, he had begun to see us all as adversaries. No longer his family, but obstacles in his journey. That realization, that my brother, my flesh and blood, could look at me and see not a sibling, but an opponent, was the moment everything changed. The moment our bond, so tightly woven over the years, began to unravel. From that point on, every interaction, every conversation would be framed by this new lens, this new understanding, that Harry was no longer part of the family he once stood beside, but a man on the outside looking in, convinced that everyone else was the problem. Before Meghan Markle became the Duchess of Sussex, her past was under intense scrutiny, dissected and analyzed by both American and British media. It wasn't the fact that she had a past that concerned me. After all, everyone does. What troubled me was the way her past was portrayed. The media painted a picture of her as someone constantly trying to build and control a public persona. The narrative was one of ambition, self-image control, and personal fractures, and it seemed that every relationship she had was framed as a spectacle. Her personal life, rarely smooth or quiet, was consistently turned into a public affair. From 2008 to 2011, Meghan was frequently in the entertainment news. She was a young actress, striving to carve out her place in the competitive world of Hollywood. In 2011, she married producer Trevor Engelson, but their marriage ended quickly, less than 2 years later. The tabloids had a field day with it, blasting the breakup and emphasizing how swiftly it fell apart. They pointed out the geographic distance between the couple, the shifting career priorities, and how their relationship had ended almost as quickly as it had begun. It wasn't just a breakup. It was framed as a pattern of hasty commitments followed by even quicker exits. It was as though she was being defined by a series of failed relationships, painting a picture of someone who couldn't maintain stability, even in the most important parts of her life. From 2013 to 2016, while Meghan was working on Suits, the American media consistently highlighted her efforts to build a personal brand. Articles about her lifestyle blog, the TIG, became a regular feature in the press. The media buzzed about her connections within Hollywood, her ability to network, and her hands-on approach to managing her public image. In the world of Hollywood, this was normal. In the royal family, it was cause for concern. The very thing that had allowed Meghan to succeed in Hollywood was something that seemed at odds with the role she was now stepping into. Her media presence felt like a stark departure from the discretion and restraint that the royal family had long upheld. During this period, reports also surfaced of strained family relationships on Meghan's side. There were whispers of disagreements with her relatives, some of which played out in the tabloids for everyone to see. The details of these reports were often disputed, but one thing became clear: Meghan's personal relationships rarely ended quietly. They were often filled with drama, tension, and conflict. It seemed as though every family issue was exposed to the public, and every conflict became fodder for the press. To the outside world, this painted a picture of instability, of a woman who was always caught in emotional turmoil, unable to find peace or resolution in her personal life. By the time 2016 arrived, the media landscape had shifted dramatically. When Harry and Meghan's relationship went public, the media quickly divided into two opposing narratives. In the US, Meghan was portrayed as a victim, a woman trapped by a cold, unfeeling royal family that refused to accept her. The British press, on the other hand, painted the royal family as the antagonist, an institution that was stuck in its outdated, centuries-old ways, at odds with Meghan's modern ideals and progressive outlook. The stories were rapidly built, taking root particularly in the US, where the narrative of a modern woman standing up to a centuries-old institution resonated deeply. What troubled me wasn't the support Meghan received. What troubled me was how quickly the media constructed a full, complete narrative around her. In such a short span of time, the media had built characters, motives, and conclusions. When a story is framed so quickly, it doesn't just take shape, it drives everything that follows, shaping how we all see the events. The media isn't just telling the story, it's controlling it, and in doing so, it becomes the defining lens through which everything is interpreted. By the end of 2016, when the palace issued a rare statement about protecting Harry's private life, it was seen as a direct response to the mounting media pressure. Some British outlets questioned why the palace's response differed so drastically from previous years, where media scrutiny had been more easily managed. Behind the closed doors of the palace, concerns were beginning to grow. There was a sense of unease among those of us who understood how the media operated. It wasn't just a matter of Harry and Meghan's personal lives anymore. The media was in control of the narrative, and that posed a direct threat to the royal family's carefully constructed image and the stability of the monarchy. At that time, I couldn't come to a final conclusion. I simply watched and observed, taking in the signs, both subtle and blatant. What I saw was a pattern that linked Meghan's past with the future of the royal family. Her past, filled with quick exits and personal drama, her present, shaped by careful image management, and a future framed by the US media that positioned Meghan as a symbol of liberation from the royal family's constraints. None of this was evidence of wrongdoing, but in an institution that relies on stability, these were all warning signs. And yet, no one seemed willing to acknowledge them. The most terrifying realization, however, wasn't about Meghan. It was about Harry. The more time passed, the more I watched him adopt every narrative that was presented to him. He began to see every action from the family, every word of advice, as an attack. The warnings I gave him were no longer seen as protective, they were seen as control. His growing resentment towards the family was becoming impossible to ignore. What had once been a relationship based on mutual understanding and love was now strained, fractured, and drifting further apart with each passing day. It became clear to me that what was once a deep familial bond, an unspoken trust between brothers, was slipping away piece by piece as Harry began to embrace a narrative that was built on division. And in that moment, I realized that we were no longer just brothers navigating the complexities of life together. We were becoming strangers to each other. You've heard the story, but have you heard it all? The truth behind the headlines is far deeper and more complicated than what's been told to the public. If you want more behind-the-scenes insights into the royal family, the real dynamics, and how everything changed, hit that subscribe button. Join me as we continue unraveling the story. Don't forget to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice matters in this conversation. Thank you for watching and stay tuned. There's more to come.